joined by Arthur Hurman, Senior Fellow of the Hudson Institute. Been the guest on my show before. Follow him on Twitter at Arthur L. Hurman. I want to talk to him about a book I've never talked with him about before. Good morning, Arthur. How are you and your family doing?
We're doing okay. My parents, my mother's going to be 90 in June, and fortunately they live in a community in Wisconsin. They've had 0 coronavirus cases, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed, and that is I'll be able to visit my parents by the end of the summer.
Knock on wood. Now, Arthur, I wanted to talk to you about your book, Freedom's Forge, How American Business Produced Victory in World War II. Has anyone from the administration called you about, you studied the Defense Production Act's predecessor. It seems relevant to me, this book right now. Anyone called you up about it?
Oh, yeah. I've been, Hugh, I've been on the phone with administration officials, with TV interviewers, with members of defense technology associations, including the Aerospace Industries Association. And I know that Peter Navarro, who was really the driving engine of the coronavirus production machine, and the man who really, I think, has emerged as one of the big heroes out of this whole process. He's a huge fan of the book. We've talked about the book. I know he gives copies to visitors. This was even before this whole crisis came down on us. So I'm very happy to see that the lessons that I wrote about in that book, about how we really did manage to outproduce the rest of the world and the Axis powers with war materiel by tapping into America's innovation and most productive companies, that we've got an administration and someone like Peter Navarro who really understands and has taken to heart those lessons.
Now, Arthur, I have been reading as part of my long walks alone, been listening to the great Citizen Soldier book by Stephen Ambrose. And we went from 165,000 standing army in 1939 to 8 million men in the field, and we supplied them logistically with everything they needed. It is sometimes overwhelming to consider what this country made in 5.5 years. Is there any reason we cannot make what the world needs for the virus?
I don't think so. I published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying that we could be the arsenal to combat coronavirus and future viruses. But there's a couple of key things we have to keep in mind, Hugh, about what was the difference between where we were in 1940, which is when we began the ramp-up for wartime production, first to help break Britain and then, of course, to arm ourselves for the conflict we knew was coming. The first difference is that in 1940, the means of production, the supply chains, as we would say today, for manufacturing and for industry, were all here. They were all in the United States. Today we've got supply chains that are spread all across the world, and unfortunately, as we're finding out, a large number of those supply chains terminate in China, not least for our pharmaceuticals and healthcare products. That's one of the challenges that we're going to have to take on, and we're taking on now by trying to get so many companies to shift to help manufacture PPEs, to manufacture ventilators, and to get that kind of production underway and take it away from places where we've had to rely in the past, including China. But that's going to be one of the long-term impacts of this, Hugh, is going to be realizing we can't afford to have our supply chains, our vital supply chains for products and for even defense systems terminating in China.
There are three areas. One is pharmaceuticals. You named the second one, defense system. And then one which I think stands apart, which is the nuclear power industry. We need to mine, we need to convert, and we need to enrich. And we need to do it all in American factories from American mines, and we need to do it yesterday, and we're not doing it.
I can't disagree. And you know what? And the technology for nuclear power and the kinds of nuclear power plants that we have today, which are smaller, safer, and more efficient, that don't even produce large quantities of plutonium as earlier generations of nuclear reactors did. This is a huge priority for us, not just for our own energy independence, but also because China has seen this as a huge opportunity for them to proliferate their own nuclear technology to countries like France, countries in Europe and in Asia, when their safety standards are not up to ours and when their reliability is not what we can deliver in the nuclear power industry. I think that's another one of the areas in which we're going to see more and more in a green light, Hugh, because zero carbon emissions with nuclear power. And that's another big change that I think is going to come out when we come to the end of this episode and look back and say, how do we avoid being stuck in a crisis like this again?
Now, Arthur Hurman, you're a historian. There is another major difference, and it pains me to bring it up. I have a piece in the Washington Post today about Jared Kushner and the fact that he's getting assailed by slings and arrows, even though he is doing yeoman's work that even Bill de Blasio has commented him on. And that difference is the era of patriotism in 1941, after we were attacked, was nearly universal. And even those who were isolationists to the core flipped on a dime and became 100% in the struggle. I don't see that happening in America right now. Do you?
What I see is increasingly that the critics of the Trump administration, having failed to bring him down with the Russia hoax, having failed to bring him down on the Ukraine phone call, are now thinking that maybe they can finally get rid of Trump by emphasizing and focusing on the COVID-19 response, when they themselves, are culpable for the degree to which they distracted this country through the impeachment crisis and the degree to which so many of them have been complicit in expanding China's influence and expanding the China lobby as an important factor in distorting our economic relations and economic fortunes. And I think you're right. I think that what is going to come out of all of this, too, is another look at just what the cost of partisan warfare and politicization of every issue, especially by the mainstream media, has been for all of us. And if China has great culpability, and I think we need to hold them accountable for the damage that they have done to the world by allowing this virus to propagate and to metastasize, I think we also have to look at the degree to which mainstream media and a certain political party in Washington have distorted our political lens so that this crisis came upon us when we were really unprepared to deal with what was really coming here. Thank goodness that the Trump administration and officials in the administration like Peter Navarro had their eyes on the ball and weren't distracted by all of the partisan warfare that was unfolding in Washington, as you remember, through November, through December, and even into January.
And February. Arthur Hurman, you're at the Hudson Institute, and therefore you are a successor in interest in one respect to the great Herman Kahn. Arthur Hurman is succeeding Herman Kahn, a futurist. I believe one of the profound consequences, I'm very certain about this, is that American media credibility is shattered. And I mean shattered. I don't know that they ever get it back. The audience has already crashed. I think it will continue to crash, and something else will rise in its place. I just talked to a young YouTube influencer. What do you think? Can they ever get it back?
No, I think that that they're so stuck and jammed into a mindset that really unfolded after Watergate. The hubris on the part of the mainstream media that they can make and break presidents at will, I think, is part of that mentality, and it has done enormous damage to the political institutions of our country, to our political culture. And now today, I think we have to say that it may be costing us human lives in the degree to which a distorted message about what this administration is doing in response to the COVID crisis, where that crisis originated, namely in China, and the degree to which China has to assume culpability around the world for what has happened, and that shipping, plane loads of respirators and ventilators just isn't going to do it. This, I think, Hugh, is going to be China's Chernobyl. I think it's going to have enormous impact both on the domestic scene within China, but also in wrecking China's reputation as a country and as a power that you want to do business with and that you can trust even on the most important matters of life and death.
It could well be a Khrushchev moment as well. We'll see whether or not the Politburo in Beijing thinks of President Xi what the Politburo in the old Soviet Union thought of Khrushchev when the time came to change. Arthur Hurman, the book is Freedom's Forge, How American Business Produced Victory in World War II. Must reading for anyone who concerns himself with how we deal with the virus today. Thank you, Arthur. Always a pleasure. Time for me to check